Okay, Biology B students, lesson 2.1, Introduction to Biochemistry. Biochemistry, just like it sounds. Bio means life, chemistry means the study of the interactions of chemicals. So we're looking at those chemicals that are very important to life or that life produces. So biochemistry is one of the crossover fields of chemistry. Biochemists have to understand both the living and the chemical worlds. Even if you don't want to become a biochemist, you still have to understand atoms and molecules as a biologist. So when you're done with this lesson, hopefully you'll be able to identify the elements found in each of the organic compounds, these big macromolecules that we'll look at. Explains the difference between hydrogen and covalent bonds, and that you'll also be able to explain how the atomic structure of carbon allows it to be the backbone of the organic compounds. Carbon's unique, and because it's unique, it has some really interesting characteristics that allow life to happen. Okay, so a little chemistry here. Elements, simplest form of a substance, cannot be broken down any further without changing what it is. Atom, the actual basic unit composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So you can have one atom of helium, right? In that picture there, you can see there's a couple of atoms of nitrogen. You can see a water molecule that's composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Just like the cells are the basic unit of life, the atom is the basic unit of matter. They are very small. If placed side by side, 1 million would stretch a distance of only 1 centimeter. The atom is made up of three major particles. All right, 2 of them are located inside the nucleus. The positively large charged proton, the neutrally charged large neutron. All right, so the proton's positive charge with the letter P, neutron neutrally charged or no charge, the letter N. They're both pretty big. They make up the majority of the mass of the atom. And then circling around those are the negatively charged, very small, very light electrons. All right, so there you go. You can get an idea of some of the information I just told you. Proton, positively charged. It has a mass of 1 atomic mass unit. Pretty easy to remember. Its size is large. All right, the neutron does not have a charge, but it does have a large mass, and it's pretty big. And then you can see that the electron has a negative charge, very small, hardly any mass at all. As you can see the size of the picture compared to the neutrons and the protons. So electrons are not present within the atom. Instead, they revolve around the nucleus of the atom and form what is known as the electron cloud. Okay, so what keeps them close is the charge with the positive protons. They're negative, and so there's opposites attract, and they tend to be held closer to the nucleus and not jump around unless a chemical reaction takes place. Why do the electrons stay near the nucleus and not just fly away? Because of the charge. Protons are positively charged, electrons are negatively charged, opposites attract. Okay, so elements differ from other elements by the number of protons. So if you look at the periodic table here, hydrogen has 1 proton. If you look all the way to the right, helium has 2. Underneath hydrogen, lithium has 3, beryllium 4. So these are the number of protons within the nucleus. So the periodic table is set up in increasing by 1 from left to right protons. The carbon structure is very interesting. If you click on the link, if you open up this actual presentation, you can click on the link and see some more information. However, the fact that carbon has 6 protons in its nucleus allows it to have 2 electrons close to its nucleus in that first shell that you see just outside the nucleus, and then 4 electrons on the outside of what we call the valence electrons. Very important. Because of those 4 electrons in the outer shell, it does have the ability to bond with other atoms in a very unique way. Life is based on carbon. Organic chemistry studies compounds in which carbon is a central element. The property of carbon make it form the backbone of most of our big macromolecules. It's a very versatile element because it can form 4 covalent bonds. Skeletons can vary in length. Branching and ring structure are some examples. You can see the pictures to the right. Functional groups of organic molecules are the parts involved in chemical reactions. So you can have an amine group or a hydroxyl group, different types of groups that we'll look at. Organic molecules are important for life, include relatively small monomers as well as very, very large ones. Okay, so you're looking at a couple different kinds of molecules in the right here. You can see some of them are ringed, some of them are branched, some of them are linear. One of the unique things about carbon is that it can bond a couple different ways. It can have a single bond. So if you look at the picture, this right here is a single bond. This carbon and this carbon are connected by these two bonds, this black one here. And then these two carbons and these two carbons are triple bonded. So you can see three different bonds connecting them, okay? It also has the ability to form the aromatic ring, right? It could be 5 or 6 in here, or even more. Okay, so carbon's the backbone of the four major organic molecules that we'll be looking at: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and we should have nucleic acids down here. That should say nucleic acids. Okay, so if you look at the building blocks of all the different molecules that we just talked about, the proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates, carbohydrates are what, so we'll start with hydrocarbons. If you look here, hydrocarbons are composed of just simply hydrogen and carbon. So you can have long chains of just carbons connected to a bunch of hydrogen, all right? So your ethanes and octanes and those kinds of things. Then you have your lipids, which are connected. All three of these atoms would be in your lipids. Yeah, generally you have a 1 to 1 ratio type thing going on. So C6H12O6. So you would have 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are found in these carbohydrates and lipids. If you look at amino acids and proteins, they contain all of these atoms, okay? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Nitrogen is going to form a functional group with 2 other hydrogens to make an amine group. Some proteins and amino acids would also have sulfur. Okay, so if you look at the very next one here, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur in some of the amino acids and proteins. All right, if we continue on, if you look at the nucleic acids tend to have hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Single atoms of iron, copper, magnesium for some proteins. So hydrocarbons contains the elements carbon and hydrogen. If you find a carbon compound, hydrocarbon compound like this one right here, there's only single bonds, so we use the ending "ane," right, to describe these. So ethane would be, or alkanes, or ethanes, or methane, octanes, they all have single bonds. If you see double bonds and it's only carbon and hydrogen connected, then we start to change the name from an ane to an ene. So here's ethene. This was ethane. This is ethene. All right. And then finally, if you have a triple bond, we change the ending to an ine. Right. So the one all the way to the right is known as an alkyne. All right. And then again, you have the aromatic hydrocarbon rings. Again, it could be 5 carbons in here, 6 carbons, lots of different ones. All right, so now we get into the various molecules. So carbohydrates and lipids contain elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just in different amounts. And carbohydrates, we tended to say there was 2 hydrogens for every 1 of the oxygens and carbons, whereas in the lipids, that is not going to be the same. So if you look at the picture up top here, any of the oses, that tends to be your carbohydrates, glucose, maltose, fructose, all right? Those, you would see this, the 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. In the lipids down here, you can see this massive hydrocarbon chains, massive hydrocarbon chain, another one, and they're connected by this glycerol molecule, right? This little functional group is an acid, that's a functional group's an acid, and this is a functional, so these are fatty acids right here, okay? So hydrocarbon chains, these hydrocarbon chains are a really good way to recognize whether this is a lipid versus a carbohydrate and the rings. Amino acids, a little different, right? These are your building blocks, just like a train on a car on a train is the building block of the entire train. So if this is one little car on a train, if you connect them all together, this whole thing is your train. It's the same way a protein is. These individuals are your amino acids. Remember, the body only makes, or there are only 20 that we have that we can connect. Got to get those from eating. So your protein structure, like we said before, is going to consist of the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sometimes sulfur. So this right here and this right here are your functional groups that make up your amino acid. This is an amine functional group. And this is that acid group that we just talked about with the lipids. Okay, what makes these amino acids different from each other is this thing right here. And this R group can be a bunch of different things, and that's what determines one amino acid from another. Okay, so phenylalanine, leucine, serine, cysteine, they're all different because they're different from each other because of these R groups. Okay, we just put the R group because they can be rather large. All right, so we link these things up to make the long proteins, and we talked about DNA and how that central dogma, right, the DNA information is taken to the ribosome through a messenger RNA, where the transfer RNA brings the amino acids in the proper place and organize them in a very specific sequence, right? There's your very specific sequence. So then we have the nucleic acids, RNA and DNA. Again, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen. Smallest unit in the group, just like the amino acid, is the smallest unit for the protein. Smallest unit of DNA is the nucleotide, which contains phosphorus. A phosphate group, a sugar group, and the nitrogenous base. The sequence of this nitrogenous base determines the codon, which determines the amino acid that will be delivered. Okay, and that is biochemistry.